welcome to the latest episode of Isolation Interviews with me, Rob Harkavy. Now, my next guest is a distinguished designer, entrepreneur, and now author, whose brilliant new book, Living and Loving in the Age of AIDS, and here it is out in April. His own story is inextricably linked to the story of HIV and AIDS, and I am genuinely humbled and honoured to be able to say hello to Derek Frost. Hello, Derek.
Well, hello, Rob, and thank you for your kind introduction and words. Most appreciated.
It's all downhill from here now. So thank you so much for joining me today. And before we dig more deeply into your book, with startling unoriginality, you're going to get the same first question as everybody else. How has lockdown been for you?
Well, I think lockdown actually for us, I mean, we're incredibly fortunate in that, you know, we are not under the same pressures that a lot of young people are under. And in a way, looking at the positive side of it, you know, it's been a period for reflection and slowing down, and there have been many positive aspects, I have to say.
Yeah. So can I ask you what inspired you to tell this story, which is sort of part the history of HIV and AIDS and part memoir? What inspired you to write it all down?
Well, how it originated is that we, at a later stage in our lives, started a charity called AIDS-ARC, which was focusing on providing antiretroviral drugs for people with HIV. And we started that in 2002, and we resigned as trustees, we being Jay, my husband, and I. We resigned as trustees in 2016, and I thought it would be important for the other people involved in the charity, the other trustees and our supporters, if I were to set down a record of all the activities of that charity. I did that, and I showed it to my brother-in-law, who's had a very long and eminent history or career in publishing. And he was very sweet but forthright. And he said, you know, this is not going to be of interest to anyone except people in the publishing world. But if you were to decide to set down your own history leading up to the period of starting this charity and why you did it, and if you were prepared to be sufficiently honest about that history, then maybe there's a book there that other people might be interested in reading. And I thought carefully about that because I'm quite a private person. But I decided that, you know, that our experience of this extraordinary pandemic, the AIDS pandemic, we were very closely linked into it in three ways, really, because we had been very much part of the celebrations surrounding, you know, gay liberation by starting two major clubs, and in fact, subsequently other clubs. Then ourself, or Jay, becoming infected himself pre the arrival of ARVs and having a very long battle, 6-year battle to survive. And then post-recovering from that, deciding to start actually what was our second AIDS charity, called AIDS-ARC. So we had sort of 3 or 4 bites of the cherry on the subject, and I thought, you know, we've got some stuff here which really should be set down, and that's perhaps, you know, forms part of quite a slim record on the subject. And, you know, it's a responsibility to do that. I want young people to know about that stuff.
Comparisons with It's a Sin are going to be inevitable.
Sure.
Let's get it out of the way. What did you think of the programme, and how much of it resonated with your experience of those times during the 80s?
Well, I love the programme. I've seen it all through twice, and probably will again. I'm really grateful to Russell for writing such a thing. I think his motives for doing it were almost identical to mine. You know, he'd lived through the experience. He was perhaps traumatized by it. You know, there was a great deal of sadness associated with it. He sadly had an experience of a lover who did die. I had an experience of a lover who didn't die. You know, there were so many parallels, really. And, you know, what appears to, well, not what appears to have come, what has come out of that amazing and wonderful and highly entertaining and beautifully crafted series is that young people have, you know, suddenly awoken to, like, Jesus, is that really what happened? You know, they can't believe that that's what happened, and they really, really, really want to know more about it. You know, they're shocked that it wasn't part of their educational curricula, etc., etc. And that's an amazing service that Russell's, that this wonderful piece of work, It's a Sin, has contributed. And I hope that in a similar fashion, I'm sure it won't be quite so large scale, but that my piece of work will do the same. My piece of work is a different piece of work in the sense that it's about real people and a real experience. Russell's It's a Sin covers a shorter period of time, mine a wider span of time, and mine ends in a very, very optimistic way, really, further down the line, because out of surviving AIDS and any transformation that happened to us personally through that experience has resulted in this charity, which so far, has saved the life of over 1,000 HIV positive people. So it's very positive. And also many aspects of the whole AIDS journey, is a story of triumph in that, relatively recently, this pandemic arrived. Science finally got onto it. It took a long time for science to get onto it, mostly because of the hideous attitude to people in government, and most particularly to Reagan, who, famously, didn't even mention the subject for the first 6 years of his presidency. But, science has done something wonderful. It came up with drugs. AIDS maybe appeared in the early 80s, and by the late 90s, 97, there were drugs that were available that stopped people dying.
You mentioned earlier on in that answer that very sadly Russell had a partner who died, and your partner, now husband, Jay, was diagnosed. Is now is still with us, which is fantastic. And I think that's one thing that a lot of young people today don't understand, not through a fault of their own, because as you say, a lack of education is what a lottery it was. I mean, I had exactly the same lifestyle as very many friends of mine, many of whom, like in your case, are no longer with us. And I remember going up to the Royal Free in Hampstead for my test, and negative. Other people who I know had, let's say, far less of a louche lifestyle than me, are no longer with us, and they were positive. And not only that, you had to, I mean, I really can't remember exactly, but I think I waited about 3 weeks for the result. And that was agonizing. I mean, you can do it in your lunch hour now, which is fantastic, but it was agonizing, that 2 or 3 week wait, wasn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think just to, to correct facts, I mean, to make it clear to your audience, Russell's husband died not of AIDS, but died of a brain tumor. But he died, of course, a great sadness. Jeremy survived, and a great good fortune. And I think, going back to It's a Sin, it's Roscoe who says in It's a Sin, it's like, it could have happened to any of us. We all slept with zillions of people. We were all partying like crazy. It was just a lottery. We were just bloody lucky. And, I mean, I've lived with Jeremy, we started living together in 78. Well, for a lot of that time we were fucking, and, without having safe sex, and he was positive, so like, what happened there?
Yeah.
I don't know, but incredible good fortune.
Catastrophic events usually give rise to a lot of art, literature, film, whatever, and, just the output surrounding the Second World War, which finished 80 years ago or something. Now 33 million people, I think, have died worldwide of AIDS. And that's not many less than the number of civilians who died in the Second World War, and that includes the Holocaust. And I wonder why. And your book has come out, we've had It's a Sin, but there is a vanishingly small amount of art that deals, of all forms, that deals with this. I just wonder if you've got any ideas why it's sort of almost been ignored, certainly by the mainstream. I mean, gay people like yourself and Russell are creating stuff and our website are doing stuff about HIV and AIDS, but it's pretty much ignored by the mainstream. I wonder why you think that is.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, in fact, the figure I think is, what I've read is actually nearer to 40, but who's counting? I mean, it's an unbelievably large number of people. And, what you say is 100% correct. And it is fascinating to address that question. I guess the answer has to be, is that only queers and drug addicts had it. So who cared?
Yeah.
It wasn't a big deal. America took the lead from their president. I mean, if he wasn't going to talk about it, why should anyone else? Now, happily, that's starting to change, and hopefully that will be reflected in the literature, and certainly post It's a Sin. The media has been, I have to say, totally wonderful in embracing it's a sin, and talking about it and exploring that subject and asking themselves exactly the question that you have also asked. It's a tragedy, but it's a tragedy which fortunately is being addressed, and we are talking about it. It needs to be talked about. It's an extraordinary event which sadly continues in that last year it's estimated 600,000 or 700,000 people died of AIDS around the world. I think it's unfortunate, really, that the focus is so sort of, I don't know what the right word is. I was going to say, sort of European Western centric, as if the problem's over, because, the problem certainly isn't over. We're still in a war, but it's a war that is being won, which is really exciting. But I agree, there are a million untold stories, and it's really gratifying that so many young people particularly want to know and are demanding to know.
Your story, perhaps not just because of what you've done, but also really by accident of birth, exactly follows, if you like, the development of gay rights in the United Kingdom. I think you were probably a teenager at around the time of the 1967 Act, and and here we are today. What do you think the young Derek, just coming out, just wrestling with his own sexuality, then coming to terms with it, would think of gay rights and being gay in the United Kingdom in 2021?
Well, I guess I'd be absolutely thrilled. I mean, what we've achieved, is absolutely thrilling. In 67, I was 15, as you correctly say. I probably wasn't even thinking about it. At 15, to be perfectly honest, I was having lots of sex in school with boys without even having heard the word homosexuality or gay. I just thought, it's kind of what kids did at school at that age,
I know.
Yeah, about it too. It was only post school that I even knew I was like one of those, and I didn't feel that happy about it at all. And I mentioned in my book, the similar question was addressed to Armistead Maupin. He said, the great author of Tales and etc. And he said it was like the worst possible thing you could possibly imagine. It was like worse than being, worse than being a murderer or a rapist or, Now, I think because that self-hate, is at the root of a lot of problems. And now gay people kind of love themselves, and that's great too, But what we've achieved is quite staggering in parts of the world. Yes. And in other parts of this very, very polarized world, sadly, things have gone badly in the wrong direction.
Derek, thank you so much for joining us today, and also thank you for writing this brilliant memoir. I think it will go down as a sort of seminal LGBT tome, and all school children, gay, straight, whatever, should read it. And if Out News Global can do anything about it, they certainly will. So it only remains for me to say thanks once again, Derek, and I wish you and Jay much love, luck, and happiness. Thank you.
That's very kind and very appreciated. Take care.